go down. Past the ice, past the last of the light, into water that sits just above freezing, and sometimes just below it. The pressure builds, the cold stops being a temperature, and becomes a pressure of its own. There is no sunlight here, and there has not been for a very long time. And somewhere in that black, something is moving toward you so slowly that you would not notice it arrive. It is roughly 5 meters long, 16 feet. Its skin is the color of wet slate, and its snout is blunt and rounded, almost soft-looking. It has no speed and no urgency, and it makes no sound. Hanging from one of its eyes, trailing backward in the water like a torn ribbon, is a living parasite that has eaten through the surface of that eye and stayed there. This animal was already alive when the last of the Stuarts sat on the English throne. It was swimming in this water before the United States existed, before Napoleon. It has been in the dark, moving at this exact unhurried pace, for something on the order of 3 centuries, and in its stomach, researchers have found the remains of seals. That is the problem this file exists to solve. Because this animal cannot swim as fast as you can walk. Its top speed is roughly half that of the seals it apparently eats. Most individuals are partially blind, and in the entire history of marine biology, nobody has ever seen one catch anything. So we have a predator that is older than most nations, that cannot chase, cannot see well, and has never been observed hunting, with fresh seal inside it. Start with the age, because for a long time nobody could even establish that. Aging a shark is normally done the way you age a tree. Most sharks lay down growth bands in calcified tissue, in the vertebrae or the spines, and you count the rings. The Greenland shark does not cooperate. Its skeleton is cartilage, and it carries almost no calcified tissue to read. For most of the 20th century, the honest answer to how old these animals get was that nobody knew. There were suspicions, because tagging studies had shown they grow at something close to 1 centimeter per year, less than half an inch. And an animal that reaches 5 meters at that rate has to be doing something unusual with time. But suspicion is not a measurement. The solution, when it came, was genuinely strange, and it relied on the single largest chemical fingerprint humanity has ever left on the planet. The lens of a vertebrate eye contains proteins that are laid down before birth and are then never replaced, not repaired, not recycled, not swapped out. The material at the very center of the lens is, chemically, as old as the animal itself. It is a sealed capsule of the moment that individual was formed. So a team led by a Danish biologist named Julius Nielsen went and got 28 of them. 28 female Greenland sharks, taken as bycatch, ranging from under a meter to just over 5. They dissected out the eye lenses, drilled down to the nucleus of each one, and radiocarbon dated the protein. And here is where the 20th century did the work for them. In the 1950s and early 60s, atmospheric nuclear weapons testing dumped a spike of carbon-14 into the atmosphere, and that spike washed into the ocean and into the food web. It is called the bomb pulse, and for anything alive since then, it acts as a timestamp. If the bomb pulse is in the lens, the animal was born after the early 1960s. If it is not, the animal is older than the nuclear age. Only the smallest sharks in the study carried it. Everything above about 220 centimeters was born before the bombs. The results, published in the journal Science in 2016, established a minimum lifespan of 272 years. The largest animal in the sample, just over 5 meters, came out at 392 years, with a wide margin of error on either side. That made the Greenland shark the longest-lived vertebrate ever measured, by a distance that is not close. And this is exactly the point where the story got away from the science, which matters because the version most people have heard is wrong. You may have seen a headline about a 512-year-old shark born before Shakespeare. That number circulated worldwide. It is not a measurement. It is the outermost edge of a statistical confidence range, the extreme upper bound of the uncertainty on one animal, reported as though it were a birthday. The researchers never claimed it. An aging specialist who reviewed the work put the caution plainly. Because this is an indirect measurement, the precise figures at the top of the range are exactly the ones you should not lean on. What the study genuinely establishes is remarkable enough without inflation. These animals routinely live for centuries. The upper limit is not yet known, but buried in that same paper is a number that turns out to matter far more than the headline one. And almost nobody talks about it. The sharks in the study did not reach sexual maturity until they were around 150 years old. Sit with that. Not 150 days. Not months. Years. The Greenland shark spends roughly a century and a half as a juvenile. It swims through the entire lifespan of a blue whale, twice over, before it is capable of reproducing once. Hold on to that number, because at the end of this file it becomes the most important thing in it. For now, it points at a different question. What kind of biology runs that slowly, and what does it cost? The obvious explanation is the cold, and the cold is genuinely part of it. These sharks live in water between roughly -1 and 7 degrees Celsius, and chemistry slows down when it gets cold. Metabolic rate drops, growth drops, and the damage that accumulates in tissue over a lifetime accumulates more slowly too. But cold alone does not explain it, because the Arctic is full of animals that live in the same water and do not live for centuries. The cold is the environment. It is not the mechanism. And whatever the mechanism is, it has left a fingerprint throughout this animal's body that is impossible to miss, because it makes the shark poisonous. Greenland shark flesh is saturated with urea and a compound called trimethylamine oxide. In a normal shark, these are osmotic regulators, the chemistry that keeps a shark's blood in balance with seawater. In this one, they are present at extraordinary concentrations, and they are doing an additional job. They act as a biological antifreeze, stabilizing proteins and enzymes against the deforming effects of extreme cold and pressure. It is what lets the machinery work at temperatures where machinery should stop. The side effect is that eating one is dangerous. During digestion, the trimethylamine oxide breaks down into trimethylamine, which is toxic. The recorded effects in humans read like severe intoxication, along with serious intestinal distress. The animal smells strongly of ammonia. Fresh, it is not food, which makes what happens in Iceland one of the strangest culinary facts on Earth. There is a traditional dish called hakarl, and the process is essentially an extended chemical decontamination. The flesh is buried and pressed for weeks, so the fluids drain out and it ferments, then dug up and hung to dry in open air for months more. What comes out the other side is edible, in the technical sense of the word. In Greenland, the meat has traditionally been dried and fed to sled dogs, so we have an animal built out of antifreeze, running on a metabolism that barely qualifies as running. And its senses are in no better shape. Look at the eyes. Most Greenland sharks that scientists examine are carrying a parasite. It is a copepod, a small crustacean called Omatocoita elongata, and it does something specific and permanent. It attaches directly to the cornea, anchoring itself into the surface of the eye, and it feeds on the corneal tissue. It grows to a couple of centimeters and trails behind the shark's head as it swims. The damage it causes leaves the cornea scarred and opaque. The usual pattern is one parasite in one eye. So total blindness is not the norm, but vision in the affected eye is seriously degraded, and this is happening to an enormous proportion of the population. Now, there is a story attached to this, and it is a good one. The suggestion, first floated back in 1961, is that the parasite might be bioluminescent, and that its glow might act as a lure, drawing curious prey toward the mouth of a half-blind shark, a handicap turned into a fishing rod. It is a wonderful idea. It has also never been verified. That hypothesis has been sitting in the literature for over 60 years without confirmation, and it is repeatedly described as speculation that remains unproven. There is no established evidence that the parasite is anything other than a parasite. If you have heard the glowing lure version presented as fact, you have heard a hypothesis wearing a costume. What is established is that the shark does not seem functionally impaired by losing its vision. Because down there, vision was never the point. It hunts with smell, with the pressure-sensing lateral line along its body, and with electroreception, the gel-filled pores across its snout that detect the electrical fields generated by living muscle. In permanent darkness, an eye is close to decorative, none of which solves the actual problem. Because the shark's senses are not the bottleneck, its body is. In 2012, researchers in Svalbard put accelerometer tags on free-swimming Greenland sharks to measure how they actually move. The results made this animal the slowest fish in the ocean for its size, and it was not close. Cruising speed came out at around 34 centimeters per second. That is roughly 3/4 of a mile per hour. A relaxed human walking pace is more than 3 times that. The tail beats about once every 7 seconds. When the animal pushes to a burst, its maximum is only about double its cruise, which still leaves it at less than 2 miles an hour. A ringed seal moves at multiples of that. The researchers compared the shark's top speed and acceleration directly against seal performance and found it was not in the same category. And critically, the cold does not excuse it. Many cold water animals partly compensate for chilled muscle by recruiting more fibers or evolving cold-adapted ones. This shark does not appear to fully do that. It is not slow because the Arctic forces it to be. It is slow because it is built slow. So the machine has been measured, and the measurement says this animal cannot catch a seal. Then you open the stomachs. Ringed seal, harbor seal, hooded seal, bearded seal, Atlantic cod, Greenland halibut, wolfish, redfish, skates, squid, and beyond that, the list becomes surreal. Reindeer, moose, horse, dog, and in at least one documented case, polar bear. Some of that is obviously scavenging, and Greenland sharks are absolutely scavengers. A reindeer does not enter the Arctic Ocean under its own power. Anything that drowns, falls through ice, or dies at sea eventually reaches the bottom. And an animal with an extremely low energy budget and a good nose is well placed to collect it. For a long time, that was the default reading of the whole diet. The seals were assumed to be carrion too, a slow shark eating dead things. Then somebody looked closely at the condition of the remains, and the default reading fell apart. When a carcass sits on the seabed, it gets colonized. Scavenging invertebrates, amphipods and their relatives, find it and move in, and their presence in the tissue is a reliable signature that the animal was dead for a while before it was eaten. In the seal remains recovered from Greenland shark stomachs, those invertebrates were conspicuously absent. The seals had not been lying dead on the bottom. They went into the shark fresh. Combined with the physical condition of the remains, the conclusion in the literature is that these animals are not only scavengers, but active predators of both fish and mammals. A dietary study across a large sample even found a pattern of change over a lifetime. The smallest sharks feed lower down the food web, mostly on squid, while larger animals shift onto seals and large fish, with the biggest individuals taking prey the smaller ones do not. So it is not an accident, and it is not rare. This is what the species does, which leaves the question standing in the middle of the room with nothing to lean on. How does an animal that cannot outswim a walking human, in the dark, half-blind, catch a healthy seal? Nobody knows. But there are two serious hypotheses, and they are worth separating from speculation. The leading one comes from the Japanese biologist Yuki Watanabe, whose team ran the speed measurements and it turns on a quirk of seal biology. Seals sleep in the water, unlike whales and dolphins, which shut down one hemisphere of the brain at a time and never fully switch off. Seals appear to sleep completely, either floating at the surface or suspended below it. A sleeping seal is not a fast seal. It is a stationary object with no lookout posted, and an animal that moves at 1/3 of a meter per second, generating almost no turbulence and almost no sound, is the single best designed thing in the ocean for approaching something that is asleep. Under this reading, the shark's slowness is not a handicap it overcame. It is the weapon. It is so slow that it does not register as approaching. The second hypothesis, from the American shark researcher Gregory Skomal, is a variation rather than a rival. That the shark's coloration and creeping movement let it get close to seals that are awake but unaware, closing the distance below the threshold at which a seal would recognize it as a threat. Both are plausible. Neither is confirmed. And the reason neither is confirmed is the same reason this file cannot be closed. Nobody has ever watched it happen. That is not a figure of speech. The scientific literature states it directly. Greenland sharks have never been observed hunting and killing a seal. Everything in this file, the entire predatory reputation of the longest-lived vertebrate on Earth, is reconstructed from stomach contents, tag data, and the absence of scavenging invertebrates in a piece of tissue. There is no footage. There is no eyewitness account. There is a body of evidence and a hole at the center of it exactly where the animal's most important behavior should be. And that brings us back to the number from earlier, which is where this stops being a curiosity and becomes something worse. 150 years to sexual maturity. Think about what that means for a population. A Greenland shark caught in a trawl net today might be 100 years old and have never reproduced. Not once. It has been alive since before the First World War, and it has not yet contributed a single offspring to its species. And now it is on a deck. Through the early 20th century, these sharks were fished deliberately for the oil in their livers, and in some years the catch ran past 30,000 animals annually. That fishery has largely stopped, but the killing has not, because they still come up as bycatch in deep-sea trawl and longline fisheries across the North Atlantic. They are currently listed as vulnerable. For almost any other species, you could model a recovery, reduce the pressure, give it a few decades, watch the numbers climb. That arithmetic does not work here. The generation time of this animal is longer than the entire history of industrial fishing, longer than the countries regulating it have existed. If every Greenland shark alive today were protected perfectly starting this afternoon, the ones born from that protection would not begin reproducing until sometime around the 22nd century. There is no management plan on Earth that operates on that timescale, because no human institution has ever survived long enough to see one through. We are removing, in single hauls, animals that took 300 years to make, and we are doing it to a creature we cannot even claim to understand, because we have never seen it do the one thing that defines it. So here is where the file stands. We know how old it gets, and the method used to find out is one of the more elegant things science has done with the fallout of nuclear weapons. We know its chemistry is antifreeze, and that the antifreeze is poison. We know it is the slowest fish in the sea for its size, that most of them are partially blind, and that the glowing lure story is a 60-year-old guess that has never been confirmed. We know, from the absence of scavengers in its stomach, that it takes live seals. We do not know how. We do not know what its true maximum age is, only that the measured floor is close to 3 centuries. We do not know how many are left, and we do not know how much longer we have to find out, because the answer sits inside an animal that needs 1.5 centuries to reproduce and is currently being pulled out of the water faster than it can be replaced. There is something particular about this one that is worth saying plainly. Every other file we open is about an animal doing something spectacular, This one is about an animal doing almost nothing for an extraordinarily long time and being better at surviving than anything else with a backbone. It does not fight. It does not chase. It moves at a pace that would embarrass a jellyfish, in water that would kill you in minutes. And it has been doing that since before the country you are watching this from existed. Its entire strategy is to outlast. And it works so well that the only thing on this planet that has ever meaningfully threatened it is a species that has been industrialized for 200 years. So Apex Files wants your verdict. And this one is genuinely open. The sleeping seal hypothesis says the shark is a stealth hunter whose slowness is the weapon. But there is a harder possibility nobody has ruled out, that we are wrong about the predation entirely. And there is some third thing happening down there we have not imagined yet. Which do you back? And what would it take to convince you? Argue it out below, because the people who study this animal for a living have not settled it either. And if a file that ends with an honest gap is worth more to you than one that ends with a confident guess, hit like and subscribe. The next case belongs to the most feared fish on the planet, and almost everything you have been told about it can be traced back to a single afternoon in 1913, when a group of men arranged a show for a visiting president. Apex Files. Case open.